To my right, we have Bruce Mitchell from Pro Wrestling Torch. We have Herb Simmons, really one of the longest tenured independent promoters in the United States. I mean, it's going back 30 plus years, right, Herb? 44? Well, I wasn't trying to age you, but you aged yourself. So, Tony Gorea is here with us, and for me, and for maybe many of you as well, when I think of WWF or WWF from Madison Square Garden, it's not necessarily Slaughter or Hogan. I think guys like Tony Gorea, who was sort of a gatekeeper that was there to always wrestle somebody, really third match of the show as they made their way up and down the card. And he's a former tag team champion as well. And Tony Gorea, great to have you here.
Thank you.
Great talent. And what an honor this is. We're Barbara Goodish, Bruiser Brody, Frank's wife, is with us. Wow, this is an incredible opportunity. And then one of Brody's longtime tag team partners, one of his best friends, one of the hardest hitting men in the world, probably still today, Stan Hansen, Stan Larry Hansen is showing us as well. You know, and to kick things off, because we have a panel of people here that knew him so well. But who would you say actually of the group up here, and I know you're his wife, but with the wrestling travel and all that, you didn't see him all the time, who do you think knew Bruiser Brody the best?
Well, I think I'll take that honor. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. It's an honor. It's an honor for me to be asked to be on this panel with such the people that are here. But I guess my years of working with Bruiser Brody, Frank Gotch, dates way back to the late 70s into the 80s. But I got to tell you, I know a lot about him. Had a lot of conversations with him over those years. But there's a couple of people that know him a lot better than I do. And of course, I think you'd all agree that his lovely wife, Barbara, who we'll hear from here shortly, knows a lot of things about him that she'll share. We have another guest with us, his sister, here in the audience with us, Gable. That has all kinds of stories that can tell you. But I got to tell you, a guy who kicked more butt in Japan with him than anybody I know, and that's Stan Hansen. He can probably tell us a bunch. And I showed Stan a couple of videos, and it's amazing when you remind these guys of what they meant to the business. It's great. So those are the people that know more. I mean, I can tell you the stories about how he put matches together for me and made the little independent promoter from Southern Illinois 44 years later. I get to sit here and talk about him. So I think, Barbara, you could really tell a lot about him.
Well, I do know that right from the very beginning, he even worked me. Say hello. I have to say, he had to be one of the greatest workers. that because I met him, I was working in a hotel in Sydney, Australia, and I had all the boys come over. There was Andre the Giant, Killer Carl Crop. I could name so many. J.J. Dillon. This one here. I've known these people for 40 years plus. And I mean, I just happened to be working the front desk when he was staying at they were all staying at the same hotel. And of course, this was the days before computers, before cell phones, before the internet. So they were in a whole different, strange country. So, you know, they were lonely and they would get mail and everything. So I would hand them their mail and became great friends with so many of them. As I said, 40 years later, still friends with them. So I had just happened to be at the front desk when he was checking in. And of course, there was a rule you didn't associate with any of that. And that wasn't in because I knew nothing about wrestling. They were just friends. They were just people. They were just guests. They were just, you know, and they became friends. Never went to a wrestling match in my life. Had no idea. I mean, here I am with Andre the Giant and then the midgets. So I learned at a very young, I was young then, very young age, that, you know, you never judge anybody by their appearance. You get to know people that are inside. Because people sometimes judge, well, as you know, they judge people. So he'd come in, and that was okay, and we got to be friends and everything. And this one night, I just happened to be filling in at the front desk till 11 o'clock at night, which was very unusual. And they all came back from their matches, they'd all gone to matches, and my boss, who was a Texan gentleman, had another bar, restaurant called Bourbon and Beef that was up the road. So they all said, well, why don't you come up the road and, you know, have a drink with us? And I said, oh, well, that's okay. Well, we were all sitting, there was like maybe 12 of us, all these strange characters, so to speak, sitting at a table. Well, one by one, they would get up to use the bathroom. Well, they never came back. One by one, all of a sudden it went 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Then there was Killer Carl Kropp and Frank and myself. And then Carl gets up and leaves. Didn't come back. And then I found out later that he had arranged it all. So I have to admit, he was a good worker. And of course, here I am still sitting here after all this time, and it just kind of evolved. We were just such good friends for such a long time until he happened to, you know, come back over here. And then another thing, I wasn't thinking, everyone's saying, oh, you know, these wrestlers, you know, they're just using you. They're in a strange country. They're just, you know, having a friendship. Well, as you also know, Frank kind of left some territories, not so much in good stead, and I know a lot of you probably know that. So he came back this one night, because he was in Australia maybe 9 months, so it was quite a long time that he was back and forth. So he came back, he said, well, I'm leaving to go home tomorrow. Oh, okay, fine. Well, nice to know you. And then he had this lot of money. He puts it on the table and said, I'd like you to come with me. Well, if anybody knows you, Frank was really tight with the dollar. So I figured out, well, he must trust me because he would not leave this money. I could have taken that money and just stayed because it was quite a bit of money. But as I said, the story's finished. Here I am. I'm still sitting here. And I'm going to put you on. I could tell you a lot more, but I'll put you on the stand.
No, dude. Go ahead.
Here, Tony, you're next, because as I said.
Well, one Kiwi, another Kiwi here. Well, I was in Australia. I was only there for 3 weeks. I was on my way to Japan. I wanted to shoot down poem sailor to my brother and sister and my friends down there. And I was doing TV in Brisbane, Australia. And that was the first time I'd met Frank. But Frank had been in the New York territory, and I wasn't there. And I'd heard stories about him, and I said, Jesus, because I was going to wrestle him on television. And I was a little bit concerned. I was, how do you say, he kind of marked me out, you know, when I just seen his name, you know, Bruiser Brody, Tony Gorea. I said, oh my God. So anyway, I got to talk to him, and oh my God, he became my best friend almost right away, you know, and if I had been on the fence then, I think I might have gone that way, and there would never have been this. It would have been me. But we went out in the ring, and we had some heck of a match, and you know, he was nice enough to, you know, adapt a little to my style, and it was just great. But I was only there for a short time, and I was going to end up with a match with Brute Bernard, who was coming in and I think replacing Frank at that time, so they had to kind of put a little bit of steam on me. And that was I think that was the only time I ever met Frank. So that goes down in my memory bank, and I'll never lose it. It was just fantastic.
So the original question is the first time we ever met Brody?
Yeah.
When I met him? Well, I met Frank when I was at West Texas State, and that's the university where, you know, the Funks went, and Dusty Rhodes and Frank and I mean, both Funks and everything. So we were playing football, and I was getting recruited out of high school, and Frank was 3 years older, so he was already at the university. So the guy that goes to show me around as I'm thinking about coming to West Texas to play football, he takes me around and everything, and you know, I'd been to some other universities to look at, and so I kind of know the routine. Well, they're going to take me someplace to show them the room. You know, this is what you're going to be living in and everything. So this guy takes me around, and he's all day long, and now it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said, well, you know, I want to, you know, where's the dorm room? I like to see the dorm room. And he kind of hem-hawed around about it, and he finally walks over. You know, he takes me to his room, and he stops outside, and he says, you're assigned, you know, you're given a roommate, and you know, you don't really have a choice. You know, everybody gets along pretty good and everything, but you know, they're just different people and everything. And he's making all this, yeah, okay. So it's like I said, 3 in the afternoon, right? So he opens the door up, and we walk in, and there's like a line right down the middle of and on his side, it's immaculate. I mean, everything's in order. The bed's made. I mean, you know, clothes are all in a line. And on the other side, there's wads of paper. There's all sorts of trash and everything over there. There's no sheets on the bed. All the clothes are thrown around. And he says, this is my roommate, Frank Goodish. Frank wakes up, and gets up at 3 in the morning. Yeah, nice to meet you. And he rolls back over. That's the first time I met Frank. So he didn't want me to tell that story probably many times, but I have. Because it's real.
Bruce Mitchel from the Pro Wrestling Torch, and I don't have that personal story to share, but I think of Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen. I look around the room and I see Bob Roode. There's a lesson with Brody's career, not just how impactful it was at the time, but for wrestlers today and everybody today, which is know your value and know your own value and hold to that. And I think wrestling is always changing, and the politics of it is always changing, but Brody was about knowing his value, and you paid him his value, and you stuck to your word with him. And if you didn't, you know, there's all the stories that, as Barbara said, the places that he didn't leave in good stead. And so he knew how to market himself, he knew what he needed to do, and he could have impact on a wrestling show, whether it was an independent show, whether it was an All Japan show, whether WWF, whatever it was. You went to see him, and he knew that, and he expected to be compensated for that.
Well, and speaking of that, I mean, he was really an early shining example of a truly traveling independent talent, in that he would go to all sorts of different territories, and even working shows for, like, Herb, how did it come about that you actually were able to arrange for Brody to work your show? Because, I mean, you weren't in the traditional territory system. It was kind of about what point did you start promoting with Brody?
Well, a lot of fans don't realize Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling, which is what we do, was one of the first independent shows that Frank started working, and that was due to my good friend Larry Matisek, who started working when he was 16 years old for Sam Muchnick, who was the president of the NWA for about 42 years. And I'll never forget, we were running the independent shows in a town in Belleville, Illinois, and Larry used to show up to those shows at the fairgrounds, and he'd always stand behind the partition and critique the matches for me. And you know, we were drawing big crowds back then, you know, a couple thousand people, which was unheard of on the independent market at the fairgrounds. And I remember Larry saying, he said, "Hey, what do you think about bringing Frank in here?" And I turned around and I said, "Frank, who are you talking about?" He said, "Well, Brody." I said, "Brody's never going to come to Belleville, Illinois. You know, nobody knows how to get here." And he said, "Well, let me work on it." So it wasn't, about a week later, he hooks me up on the phone with this guy who, in my eyes at that time, was bigger than life because he was all over TV. And him and Larry had actually concocted the plan of getting out on the independent market. So we brought him in, and the first show I booked him on, I'd heard all the horror stories. Dick the Bruiser told me, "You can't trust him, he'll do this, he'll do that." Well, later on I found out why, because him and the Bruiser had a scuffle up in, I think, around Peoria, Illinois, and Bruiser ended up on the gym floor, the locker room. But the night of the show, we was running on Thursday nights back then because the fairgrounds was booked up on the weekend, and bell time was at 8 o'clock, and the fans were there at 7, and boy, they were doing that Brody, Brody, Brody chant, and this is the biggest thing that's come to the area, to the county. And my wife, who's there with me, she was taking care of the front door, the tickets, and I walked outside. I'm trying to get a hold of Larry back then. He had these big old cell phones that looked like a big walkie-talkie, and I'm trying to run him down. He was going to pick Frank up and get him to me, and I thought, oh, all the stories and rumors I've heard are coming true. I got a sellout crowd, and there's not going to be no Frank or no Bruiser Brody. And my wife comes out and she says, "You hear what's going on in there?" And I says, "Yeah." And she says, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "What are we going to do? You got to go be the one to go back in and tell them something." And it got to be about 5 minutes to 8, and I'm looking out towards the front gate, and I see this car coming in, and this is at the big fairgrounds. And I said, "It looks like Larry's car." And they come pulling up underneath the canopy, and passenger door opens up, and he gets out with the cut-off shorts on and his tennis shoes and his hair and a rubber band, and he unfolds out of Larry's car, and he walks up to me and sticks his hand out, and he says, "Big boy, I bet you think I thought I wasn't going to come, did you?" And I said, "Nah, don't worry at all." That was my first encounter of dealing with him, and from then it just grew into a relationship that really grew until 1988. He was actually with Larry and I the week before his untimely death in another small town called Cahokia, Illinois. We had a business there, a restaurant, and a lounge, a bar, and I had turned the upstairs into the Brody Lounge, and people would come there, and when he was in town, he would come there and relax and entertain some VIP people, and we had him all weekend with us that weekend before he passed away.
All right, so I want to. This is kind of a question for Stan. Is really, if you look at the style of wrestling in All Japan before the arrival of you and Brody, it was more of that very technical kind of NWA style at the time. And you guys came in, and you really, I think, are the preeminent driving factor of a lot of what lasts today is kind of that hard-hitting style you see in Japan. If you can speak to that a little bit.
I think so. I think that I was in New Japan. The history is I was at New Japan. Frank was at All Japan, and they were building Frank up about the same time that I was kind of getting a push for the separate Japanese company. So everybody knew that we had a history back in Louisiana and everything, tag team. So it became kind of a dream team to have Hansen and Brody in Japan, the Japanese fans, because Frank was getting a push, and everybody was excited about him coming up, and then I was getting a pretty good push on the other side too. So, and then they had this kind of war, just real quick, war on talent, and then they started grabbing, they got Abdullah from All Japan to New Japan, and back and forth. And so anyway, ended up All Japan approached me about coming, and so I actually went and met Frank, and I said, "Listen, they got me an opportunity to come. I don't want to do nothing behind your back. I think there'd be a great chance for us to come." but I wanted his blessing because he's getting pushed, right? So I don't want to come in and like, yeah, what do you think about it? So I mean, he just said, hey, we just sat and talked in the Goya, cold bench out in a little park. It was kind of funny, and we were sitting there and we were talking about this, and I just said, well, I just think that we can really, if we come together, we can just have a tremendous run here in Japan. And he agreed and everything, so that's kind of how we got together over in Japan. And we did change. We changed wrestling in Japan, and because we decided that we were going to go just pillar to post every time, and if you can keep up. We're not going to go lay in a hole, So I mean, we did. I think we changed the whole style of wrestling, and it became Japanese wrestling today, I think.
Well, and there is if you haven't seen it yet, there's actually a tremendous documentary that was recently released with some fine voiceover work from Barbara on it there. And actually, most everyone on our panel is a part of that. And Herb, I know, had some copies last night. I don't know if you still have some of those available, but it's also on the High Spots Network. But in that, Barbara, you had noted that he put such a focus on Japan, not just for the money and the loyalty, but because of his hard-hitting style. He wanted to make as much money as possible because he knew just with his particular style, he thought he can't keep that up for a huge matter of time. So I guess, did you ever have discussions with him about like, hey, Frank, I'm a little concerned about your style of wrestling or your overall health or what you're doing out there?
Yes, he was very honest. He would come home and discuss a lot of things with me. And I know, as you said, he put the emphasis on Japan because they respected him and they treated him right. And he always used to say, you will never believe how it is when I'm over there. Because most of the time they were honest, they were respectful. So, and we discussed that, and he knew that in the States, there wasn't any room for his style of work, because it wasn't that he was hard to do business. If you were honest with him, he would do anything for you, like going to Herb, like going to the small show, because Herb, when he said something, he kept his word. So he never had any problem with anything that Herb wanted to go to his shows, because Herb, you're upfront guy, and he always respected. I mean, when he came back from your show, he was always happy because he didn't have any trouble. There was no animosity. There was no, this is it, this is how it's going to be, and never no problem. And in Japan, it was the same way. So yes, we did discuss a lot about that, but he knew that he was getting older and that it was going to be hard to keep up the style in Japan because it's real, like you said, Stan, it was real, it was hard-hitting, it was, you know, the total package over there. But he knew that he would probably come back and do a stint with Vince at some point of time, because he knew that the match that everybody wanted at that point was, of course, Hulk Hogan, you know, Beauty and the Beast. But he knew, could he trust? So, well, it never came to that, so we didn't go that much further because of what happened. But he was thinking of other things beyond wrestling too, because he knew at some point, like every point, you have to think about. So he was starting up, he'd started up a company called, it was called BAM, B-A-M, Brody Athletic Management. And he was going out and doing appearances, and his goal, he was working with a gentleman from the University of Texas in San Antonio. They were going to go around schools. We'd already bought a wrestling ring. He was going to go around schools, set up a ring at the school, and do a skit like, you know, this was when drugs were very big in the schools. DEAR, I think the program was called. And he figured out that if you go do the ring and talk about the dangers, I mean, these are kids at that point of their life, that you send somebody of authority and they don't listen. as you know, you send someone in like Frank, looking the way he does, and talking to them, that yes, they may actually listen. We had also bought a piece of property that he was going to make like a boys' camp in the school holidays, that the kids that were disadvantaged, that didn't have, you know, much, that they could come out, you know, the kids that were in a dangerous situation, that they could come out, go to this camp, and just learn, maybe learn values of life. So this was his goal beyond wrestling, because he was always thinking ahead, because he treated wrestling like a business. It wasn't, he didn't get caught up in becoming Bruiser Brody. He always remembered that he was Frank Goodish. So he could define the two. So as a business, this was his business, and he treated wrestling as a business. And he just wanted, when he went out in the ring, he just wanted, he wanted to give the fans the best night of their life. He wanted, they were paying money. And that is part of why wrestling is, you know, as a business, because without the fans, there is no business. So that was really, his goal was just to go out, give the very best, that they left, and they felt they got value for money. So he had a lot of different plans. And like I said, all he was thinking was the fans. So any fans here, thank you, you know, because you are what the business is all about, are the fans.
I gotta tell you. When you talk about Japan, I remember I had Frank booked on a card one show, and him and Larry called me and said, look, Frank's going to be going to Japan real shortly after your show. What do you think about that afternoon? He wants to have a special guest come in, and they want to use the ring, and he doesn't want anybody else in the building, and you know, how do you tell Larry Matisek no? And I said, sure. Well, I didn't know until I got to the arena that night, the special guest was Thesz. And they were working an angle in Japan, and as Barbara said, Frank loved going to Japan, and so here we are in this big exposition hall at the fairgrounds. Larry and I are sitting at ringside, and for an hour we got to watch Bruiser Brody and Thesz work in the ring. And it was an education that I will cherish forever. And I think what was really the most interesting thing, after they was through, after about an hour workout, Lou went over to the wall and took a aluminum folding chair and did 180 push-ups off of that thing. And Frank was in the back getting cleaned up, and we were sitting there talking to him, and Larry says, well, how was it? He said, well, let me tell you something. He says, for an old man like Thesz is, when he grabs you by the wrist, you're going where he wants you to go. So I've always remembered that, the respect that Frank had for Lou, and then here we are sitting here at the museum is, I think, really a tribute.
Part of that wrestling journalism and things like this, a smaller effect that Frank Gotch had, that Bruiser Brody had on the wrestling business, was he was a very early encourager of, he was a sports writer before he was a wrestler, and so he was very intelligent. And he saw the value in having an objective journalists cover the wrestling business, that sharing that information was power as much as kicking ass was power. And he, very early on, in a time when someone publishing non-kayfabe, straightforward accounts of the wrestling business was anathema, and he encouraged Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer, which led to Wade Keller doing the Torch. And I think if we're doing our job right, we're telling about what's happening in wrestling without fear or favor, and wrestlers themselves, fans of course, but wrestlers themselves can share that information and make better judgments on what they should be, how to manage their careers, how to manipulate what they're doing for their best value. So he was very much about being a teacher. I talked a lot with Dave about that, and we all learn from people, and so I think not just that he was a great star in Japan, a great star everywhere, and had a huge impact on the business itself, but the fact that we're sitting here, he's one of the people that saw the value and telling what wrestling really is and honoring it, and good and bad. And I always think of that. And it's one of my favorites too. And I would say Stan Hansen showing up in All Japan Pro Wrestling as a surprise. It's easy to find on YouTube. It's one of the most electric moments in anything, sports, entertainment, any other thing, not just wrestling, but it's an amazing thing and a piece of magic. And again, that style continues to this day.
There was to be such a close partner, inside our personal business together. I mean, we had a great bond, a unshakable bond. We were two guys together, and we were completely on the same road in everything we did inside the wrestling. Frank would come back, he'd go to San Antonio, I'd come back, I'd go to my home, and we basically just were separated. I mean, we would communicate a little bit, but it was more about business. A lot of things I've heard here today, I had no idea. That's where his mind was, what he was thinking to do. I came back, I had a family, and I stayed with my family as much as I could, and just forgot about wrestling and everything. And Frank could go back, and obviously, later on, when certain things happened, and Frank was out of Japan for a while, that's when he was already working the independent, promotions and so forth, but then he had to end up doing it, to make a living, so he was much more in tune to the small independent shows and so forth, and he was constantly thinking about business, where me, I was just thinking about business when the bell rang until it rang again at the end of the match, and I'd come back, and I said, well, that's enough. I never was into thinking about promoting or angles and so forth like that. I just, just give me the reins and let me run, and when I come back, it's over. Where Frank was much more of a guy that was always, and we did sit and talk at night, and we'd go out in Japan especially, we'd go out to eat, and we had talked about our business and what was going on. But there was already, when we, anyway, just real quick jumping, when I came from New Japan to All Japan and got with Baba, they already had a great crew there. Now, Baba was instrumental in wanting us to change the style of wrestling from the NWA type of style to the New Japan and the more the Japan wrestling. So, he wanted that. He was expecting us to do that, and I think that he gave us the reins. But you know what? There was a couple of other gaijins in there that are established in All Japan, and they aren't going to just step aside and let Hansen and Brody come in there and take over. And they were called the Funks. And let me tell you, they didn't lay down, they didn't, it was a fight. And we came extremely aggressive to them, and Terry Funk, Junior, of course, was one of the great champions in wrestling, but Terry Funk was more my type of guy that, and we beat each other. Literally you know, that half punchy, maybe we are punchy now, you know, but because the, you know, the Funks, and we wanted to come and you know, this whole thing, youth, well, that was the word youth. I was doing that to say we're the young. I mean, we're really not that much younger than them, but you know, we were a younger team. So that was kind of the whole push. That okay, here's Brody and Hansen. We're the young team. Get out of the way, Funks. You know, we're going to take over, and they fought, and I mean, that's what made that business. And of course, you know, they had some great Japanese talent. You know, Baba himself, of course, and Jumbo and Tenyu and a bunch of, I mean, they had some great talent. And then later, you know, there was another group of younger guys that came up, but Frank was gone by then. But it was, they didn't know what happened. All of a sudden, Hansen and Brody, I mean, we really dominated wrestling there for a few years, I must say.
Well, Barbara, I want to thank you for the comments that you said that Frank made when he came in and worked for us. But, you know, I'm sure you've all heard stories about how Frank stood promoters up and this and that. And Barbara said it best. If he appreciated you and if he respected you, and that was a two-way street. The other side of Frank that I knew is I was running shows in St. Louis, Missouri at that time at a place called South Broadway Athletic Club. A friend of mine was a promoter there, and I was helping him, and he'd always say, hey, I want to get Frank over here. I want to bring him over. So I'd call Frank and I'd say, hey, Tony wants you to make an appearance at South Broadway and do a show there. And Frank knew the history of what we were drawing there, and we was always doing good. You know, we were selling the place out. And here's a guy that was taking care of business, but he was a good enough friend that he would tell me, he said, Herb, what are you drawing over there? And I'd tell him, and he'd say, you know what's going to cost me to come in. You know, save me when you've got a place that you need to start putting butts in the seats. That was the type of guy he treated me. You know, he could have easily took the money and come in and we wouldn't put another person in the building because we were selling out anyway. So that was the other side of the Bruiser Brody that a lot of people didn't know about.
All right, and does anyone have any questions? We'll take some questions here from, Tom's got a question here.
Herb, you talk about Belleville, Illinois like it's on the other side of the earth. Now let's put some perspective on this. Larry was just finishing up with Sam, and he was hooking up with you. How far away is Belleville from St. Louis?
12 miles.
12 miles. Okay? So it's not like they were going halfway across the state of Illinois to get some distance there. They were within, you know, spitting distance of St. Louis and the history of St. Louis wrestling. So to bring a Bruiser Brody in that close to home, which St. Louis was one of his homes, you know, it was a risk at first, because they're saying, well, why is he over here and not doing big shows?
Yeah.
But it was because of the love of Larry and you and how you guys treated him that he was absolutely willing to come in and put it on the line, and did good business too. And it broke the mold of independent wrestling and established the fact that guys can come in and work independent shows, make a decent amount of money, and be successful in anything under a 16,000 seat arena.
Yeah, and it was guys, you know, I got to meet all the greats because of Frank. You know, Dick Murdoch, Crusher Blackwell, Valentine, he was my connection there, and he would bring, then I had local guys, the Giant Assassin, as you well know. He loved working the big guys, because when he wanted somebody he could use that chair on, and they wouldn't cry baby about it, but you're right, I mean, and he would tell them, when I hit you with the chair, just fall down on that cold floor, and it'll take the sting out of it.
And one follow-up, in every other arena in the world, he was Bruiser Brody. Can you tell the story of why he was King Kong Brody in St. Louis?
Yeah, back then you got to remember Sam had Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bob Sweetan was there, and I don't know how many of you have seen the commercial of him standing up on the marquee at the St. Louis Arena where he's got the letter T in his hand, and then that was all his idea. They took him about 2 days to get that shoot done right, because they had originally had him mic'd to his beard, and of course it was so windy up there on the St. Louis Arena that it was picking up so much wind noise. They ended up, the young lady who was running the box office at this arena, they ended up micing her dress that when he was holding her up there at the one shot that they did. But Frank was good at creativity. I had him at the Fairmount Park racetrack for a couple of shows, and he said, we got to come up with something unique. And it's been in magazines all over the country of him racing a horse down the backstretch carrying a jockey on his back. That was Frank. Those were Frank. I got the credit for it, but those were Frank's ideas. But that's why Bruiser, there was, like I said, Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bob Sweetan, and Sam just says, we're going to call you King Kong Brady.
Just kind of a follow-up on that, and Herb, you might be able to talk about this a little bit. I think people underrate the contribution that Bruiser Brody had in Larry's promotion in late 1983, which was running against the established promotion, was highly successful until someone kind of came in and got the television in 1984. And I didn't know if there was anything you could elaborate on that or talk about that a little bit, because he was the key star in a promotion that was kind of outdrawing the established group before then Larry went to work for Vince, obviously.
Well, yes, I was involved with those late night talks between Larry and Frank. Larry took the chance to start his own promotion after the fallout. Sam always thought Larry should have been the person to step up when he retired. They had great lengthy talks about that. Of course, the Kansas City group weighed out on that. The guy goes and racing them. And Larry started his own, and you're right, Frank was really there. He's the one who brought Nikolai Volkov in. He brought Professor Toru Tanaka in. And in behind the scenes, Larry was working with Fritz von Erich at that time. Because if you remember, that was when the Freeburg feud was really big going on in Texas. Larry had already made a deal, and it stemmed from a conversation many years before that where there was a discussion that Fritz was involved in, and Sam, and kind of what I said earlier, you treat the guys right and they're going to remember you. And Fritz told Larry, he said, look, I'm going to help you out. He said, but you got to make peace with the Kansas City boys sometime. So I'm going to send Gordy up there. So that whole Freeburg binary feud was on its way to St. Louis under Larry. But of course, as you said, the other outside forces come in and took the TV away, and of course Larry ended up on the short end of the stick. But otherwise, we'd have had the Freeburg binary feud, right here, been in St. Louis.
All right, 2006 inductee Bob Roop, everybody, has got a question.
Thank you all. First of all, thank you all for being here. If you weren't here, we wouldn't be here, would we? Stan, good to see you. Who did Frank have his first match with? Does anybody know?
I bet you do.
Well, this is so weird. I'm telling you, I don't have Alzheimer's, but I'm not sure. I think it was me.
I've heard that story before.
I know that the night before his first match, or the week before, I believe it was Fort Worth, he came by the ring, and I was in the ring, and he said something, and I said something like, you punk, or show up next week or something. It was arranged, of course. And so, I'm pretty sure I wrestled him the next week. Well, let me tell you something. Frank Goodish was a wrestling genius. And you know why? I don't remember the match. Let me explain again. Let me remember, no Alzheimer's here.
Yeah.
The reason I don't remember Example, I had a guy one time tell me, he said, oh, I loved your match with Pat Patterson out in California. I said, I never wrestled Pat Patterson. He said, oh yeah, you did. I said, no, I didn't. I wouldn't remember. He said, Bob, I'll send you the tape. Tape? About Pat Patterson. I went, oh my God. I do have Alzheimer's. I was about 40. And I thought, what I figured out, I didn't remember matches that I had that were good. There was nothing to remember because they were good matches. After you have thousands of them, it's just another match. That I didn't remember Frank and his first match meant that he was absolutely a genius to start with. And let me tell you why. I had, not his first match, but a little bit down the line. Great guy, I love him dearly, respect him dearly. Unfortunately, we lost him, Dr. Death Steve Williams. And we were in the New Orleans Superdome at a big show, and he was nervous. I mean, he was scary nervous. And I had a match with him, and I'm telling you, I haven't forgotten one bit of that match because he was so nervous. I mean, he was lethally nervous. Picked you up by the wrong arm, fire you in the ropes, not done. Only time ever done in my entire career. Where I had to go take a bump and tell the referee, tell him to calm down, please. Everything's going to be okay. And it was. The fact that I don't remember Frank is a tribute to his starting out being so calm, cool, and collected that he wasn't nervous. And we had a good match. The other thing I want to say, with the utmost respect for him, his character when he started was such, it wasn't so much his brand, which was very important to him, because that's why he could walk out. So like so many boys couldn't and wouldn't. Maybe self-respect was part of it, maybe they needed to make a living was part of it, they had a family to protect or whatever, but he would walk out because his self-respect was, and his character was as important to him, also his brand, but those came first because he had to live with himself whether he had a big name or not. He walked out on people. Believe me, he didn't walk out screwing them, they were screwing him. That's why he walked out. I did it, I don't deserve to be with these folks. They know Frank a lot better than, no, but only because you knew him so much better than I did. So what I do know of him, first class guy, very, very smart, scary as hell to look at, hit the park, and you know what? Because he refused to compromise himself, not only would he not take being screwed around, he wouldn't compromise himself in the ring either. If you couldn't make him believe it, sorry, I wasn't going to do it. And that got him in trouble, and it caused him to be injured. And you got to admire somebody like that. You know, he wasn't going to prostitute himself and belittle himself just to make money. He was saying, I'm not going to do it. You bring it to me, you give it to me, and make before I can believe it. I don't mean hurting you. I mean just to make it look believable. Then I'll go along with it. If it's not, I'm sorry. I'm not going to pander myself. That's the ultimate compliment in our business, because there's too many guys, unfortunately, were compromised. You know, they had to stick around, or it was just the way. The promoters owned everything. They had total control. They could blackball you, whatever, and people were afraid to do it. Well, he wasn't. And I hope you were lucky to have him in your life. A lot more than I did. I envy you. Thank you all.
Some of you may not realize, before West Texas, a local connection here is Bruiser actually attended Iowa State for a brief period of time. Don't know the circumstances, but led to that. There you go. Yeah, I'm an Iowa State grad, so that's pretty exciting for me. So, and before I pass it off to Tim here, Tim, do you have your book here?
It's out there in the hall.
Tim's got an excellent book if I can plug him for a moment, because I own it myself, it's great, about wrestlers dating back to like the 1850s and 60s, and I highly recommend checking it out. So you're welcome for the free plug there.
Oh, thank you.
But I want to ask, Barbara, you know, because Bruiser was such an intimidating presence, but obviously you and your son knew him on a whole different level. But was it difficult for your son at his young age to watch his dad wrestle in the ring? Would he get concerned about his dad, or was it just kind of bizarre? Because I know I was talking about this with some of the other guys that have, we have some young children, and like the first time they got to 3 years old and saw people wrestle, they start crying like, Daddy's not supposed to get hit like that.
You know, because he was only 7 years old when everything happened. He never saw his dad wrestle. Only a couple of times if he was working Fritz's territory or Blanchard's territory, we would drive with him, like to Corpus Christi or something. But we would go walk on the riverfront, or we would go walk around the city and meet him after the matches. So unfortunately, which is sad, he never did see his son wrestle. And when I talked to him about it, he said, well, people ask me about my dad, but I was too young. He said, I don't really remember much because I was too young, which that's the unfortunate thing that's happened sometimes when life throws you curves in your life. And, you know, he was the one that missed out on so much, because last night I was watching Diana's son and Jerry Briscoe's son wrestle, and I thought, what a difference, what could have been if things hadn't have happened. So that's the unfortunate thing. I wished he had more memories, but now, because he said, I just don't remember my dad. And he said, people ask me, and he said, what can I say, because I was too young. So yes, it was unfortunate.
Well, I have an interesting story. I don't have a question. I have a story I want to tell about when you talk about being intimidating and with kids, so this relates to both. For those of you who know who Tommy Wildfire Rich is, he's a good friend of mine, and several years ago I was down at Tommy's house in Georgia, and somewhere or another Bruiser's name got mentioned. And he said, oh yeah, Bruiser, he's been an overnight guest here at my house on a few occasions. And then his daughters, he has 3 daughters, they went on to tell me the story about the first time Frank walked through their doors. He was so big and so imposing and so intimidating looking. The girls said they immediately ran to their rooms and dived under their bed. They were just scared to death of him. And by that night, Frank was out in the front yard playing with them. And so the girls said that they went from fearing him so much to he quickly became their favorite overnight guest. And Tommy was telling me, he said that long after that, the girls were always asking, when will Bruiser be back? We want to play with him some more. So that'll give you an idea of Frank and kids.
There you go. Let's do one more question. We got, Bruce, you want to say something?
I'd like to impose on somebody. Brian Blair, in Florida, I know that Bruiser Brody was a big boost to your career. And if you would, tell that story.
Well, I had a lot of fun with Frank, and he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about tuna fish. Frank could eat more tuna fish than anybody I knew, and he taught me to save money. We used to travel together and for Watts. We had a great time. Not as much as Stan, but as a young kid, it was great to see somebody that you really looked up to, and all of a sudden get to ride in a car with. Let's share his life and learn from him. It's awesome when you can, you learn something from everybody. But one thing I learned about Frank is he did things his way, and they were giving me a push in Florida, but Frank was coming in and they wanted Frank to go over. So it was Greg's dad, Greg Valentine. Johnny gives us a finish. Frank's supposed to go over, no problem. I'm glad to do a job for him. And the people were buying it so much, the match, Frank looked at me and said, I'm not beating you, kid, come with me. And so he, right when the timing was right, I don't remember the exact timing, but all of a sudden he threw me out of the ring, ran, the seats scattered all over the place, and I never had any kind of match like that in my life. I was obviously in the ring wrestling style, kind of like what the Harps were talking about. But he went to throw me into the wall. He said, block it and throw me into the wall. Boom, I threw him into the wall. All of a sudden, blood's gushing everywhere, and the people are going crazy, and we end up having a double count out. And next thing I knew, I was the Florida heavyweight champion not too long after that.
Over here, someone's been waiting patiently. Thank you for your patience.
I just want to thank you for all coming to Waterloo this weekend. Barbara, can you talk about Bruiser as the family man and why he chose, he was a businessman, but family came first. Business was second. I heard an interview just recently that was conducted in the 80s with Fumi Saito, and he was talking about if Jeffrey was having a birthday came first. Don't book him on a show. He's not going to be there. Family came first. Could you explain more about wrestling was a business, but it wasn't his life. His family, your family came first. Thank you.
Yes, there's a couple of strange little stories. If the school was having like a show and tell, he took his dad to school for the show and tell. And the teachers, it was like they loved it. Harry is trying to sit in these little school chairs. You know, everyone has kids, and you know how the school chairs are at the school. And he's sitting there, and he was the show and tell. So it was, you know, the teachers loved it. And when, after everything happened, they even accommodated, because it was in the school holidays, and when he went back to school, they had him with his best friends and everything for the transition to be. But you're talking about how he looked and how people were afraid of him. Well, for Jeff, he was dad. He wasn't fearsome. He didn't look any different. He was dad, so that was a normal dad to him. So, you know, yes, he did try to do as much with family as he could. And I have to admit, just one of the memories that Jeff has a slight memory of was he took us, I think it was the Six Flags over Texas, just before it was the school holidays, before everything happened. And well, Frank didn't like heights. He didn't want anyone to know, but he really didn't like heights. Well, Jeff wanted to ride this ride. I think it was whatever it is, you went way, way up, tall. And then it came down in water. It was, well, I forget what the name of it was, but it went up, then in the water, got wet. The thing got stuck. Up there, with all the people in the car. And here he is with his son, trying not to show any fear whatsoever. And the thing got stuck. I'm down below. I didn't ride it. I was down below. And I knew, I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on? With all these people in the car, because it was one of these, like, you know, 3 seats here. It was a big old thing with a lot of people in there. And I knew. And I saw the people walking up to try and fix it, and I went, oh my goodness, this is... He came down and he said, that was one of the most scariest things that I have been through. So he tried to do, with all his schedule and everything like that, he tried to be there for Jeff as much as possible. And he always used, in those days, there was like, I think it was He-Man and Skeletor, it was the toys. And Jeff was He-Man, he was Skeletor, so they were always playing He-Man and Skeletor, like you said, on the floor with all these toys on the floor and everything. So yes, he was just dad. I mean, he came home, he was dad. We lived out on 5 acres, the gates would close, and he would just stay, unwind, be dad, be husband. The neighbors were all respectful. They knew who it was, and they were all respectful because they needed to help me because I was out there kind of in the country by myself when he wasn't there. And then when he came home, it was just family time. So thank you for that question.
All right. I know they want to convert the room around for the signing and stuff, but hey, thank you again to everyone that joined me up here, and thanks to all of you for your questions.